The morning sun cast long shadows across the naval training facility as Sarah Martinez stepped off the transport bus. Her duffel bag slung over one shoulder, she surveyed the imposing concrete buildings that would be her home for the next several months. The Advanced Naval Combat Training Center buzzed with activity as dozens of cadets moved between buildings, their crisp uniforms and confident strides marking them as the elite of the elite. Sarah deliberately kept her posture relaxed and her expression neutral. Years of specialized training had taught her the value of blending in, of letting others underestimate her capabilities. At 5'4", with a slight build, she knew she didn't fit the typical image of a hardened military operative. Her shoulder-length brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her civilian clothes gave no hint of her extensive background. As she made her way toward the main administration building, a group of 5 cadets approached from her left. Their leader, a tall blonde woman with sharp features and calculating eyes, stepped directly into Sarah's path. The woman's name tag read Stevens, and the insignia on her collar indicated she held a senior position among the trainees. Well, Stevens said, her voice carrying a mixture of amusement and condescension. Looks like we have another wannabe joining our little family. The 4 cadets behind her formed a loose semicircle, effectively blocking Sarah's path forward. Sarah stopped walking but maintained her relaxed demeanor. "Excuse me," she said politely. "I'm trying to get to the administration office for check-in." Stevens laughed, a harsh sound that drew the attention of other nearby cadets. "Oh, you're trying to get somewhere? How adorable!" She took a step closer, invading Sarah's personal space. "Let me save you some time, sweetheart. This isn't summer camp. This isn't some feel-good movie where the underdog proves everyone wrong. This is real military training, and frankly, you don't look like you could handle a strong breeze, let alone combat situations." One of Stevens's companions, a muscular young man with a shaved head, chimed in. "Maybe she took a wrong turn. The civilian orientation building is about 3 miles back that way." He pointed in the opposite direction while his friends snickered. Sarah's eyes remained calm as she assessed the group. She noted their positioning, their body language, the way they moved with the confidence of people who had never truly been challenged. These were good soldiers, probably top of their classes in previous training, but they were also comfortable in their superiority. That comfort could be a weakness. "I appreciate your concern," Sarah said evenly, "but I'm exactly where I need to be." She attempted to step around Stevens, but the blonde woman moved to block her again. "Back off," Stevens commanded, her voice rising. "You don't get to just walk past us like you belong here. We've earned our places through blood, sweat, and more training than your pretty little brain can probably comprehend." The gathered crowd of onlookers was growing, drawn by the confrontation. Sarah noticed how the other cadets watched with a mixture of entertainment and cruel anticipation. This was clearly a ritual, a hazing tradition where the established group tested newcomers. Most probably backed down immediately, either intimidated into leaving or accepting a subordinate position in the social hierarchy. Stevens continued her verbal assault. "Look at you. You probably spent the last year at some cushy desk job. Maybe played weekend warrior at a National Guard unit. You think you can just show up here and train alongside real warriors? This program breaks down military veterans, and you look like you've never even held a real weapon." The blonde cadet began circling Sarah slowly, like a predator sizing up prey. "I've seen dozens like you come and go. They all have the same look. That naive optimism. That belief that determination alone will carry them through. But when the real training starts, when the instructors start pushing, when the pain becomes too much, they all break. They all quit. And they all go home with their tails between their legs." Sarah's training kicked in automatically. She cataloged every detail. The number of observers, potential escape routes, the positioning of each threatening cadet. But more importantly, she read the psychology of the situation. Stevens needed to dominate, needed to establish her position at the top of the pecking order. The audience validated her authority and reinforced her leadership among the group. "So here's what's going to happen," Stevens said, stopping directly in front of Sarah again. "You're going to turn around. Walk back to that bus and find yourself a nice, safe career that doesn't involve real danger. We'll even help you carry your bag." The suggestion drew more laughter from her followers. Sarah tilted her head slightly, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "That's a generous offer," she said quietly. "But I think I'll stick with my original plan." The response clearly caught Stevens off guard. Most newcomers either retreated immediately or became defensive and angry, playing right into the hazing dynamic. Sarah's calm confidence was unexpected, and for just a moment, uncertainty flickered across the blonde woman's face. But Stevens quickly recovered, her expression hardening. "You really don't understand the situation, do you? This isn't a request. This is us doing you a favor before you embarrass yourself and waste everyone's time." She stepped closer until they were almost nose to nose. Last chance to walk away with some dignity and tact. Sarah's response was so quiet that Stevens had to lean forward to hear it. "I understand perfectly," she said. "You're trying to intimidate someone you perceive as weak to maintain your position in the group. It's actually quite textbook." Stevens' face flushed red. "Textbook? You think you can analyze me, little girl?" She jabbed a finger toward Sarah's chest. "The only thing textbook here is watching another civilian washout realize she's in over her head." The crowd around them had grown substantially. Word of the confrontation was spreading quickly through the facility, and cadets were emerging from buildings to watch the spectacle. Sarah could see several instructors observing from a distance, but none moved to intervene. This was clearly considered part of the unofficial training process. "You know what?" Stevens said, her voice taking on a dangerous edge. "Maybe words aren't getting through to you. Maybe you need a more practical demonstration of what real training looks like." She turned to address the crowd. "Anyone here think our new friend could handle even the basic physical requirements?" A chorus of "no" and laughter erupted from the assembled cadets. Stevens smiled triumphantly and turned back to Sarah. "Unanimous decision. But hey, I'm feeling generous. I'll give you one chance to prove you belong here. One simple challenge, and if you can handle it, we'll back off and let you go embarrass yourself in private." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "What kind of challenge?" "Basic physical fitness," Stevens replied. "Nothing fancy, nothing complicated. Just a simple test that any real military trainee should be able to handle without breaking a sweat." She gestured to a nearby obstacle course visible through the chain-link fence. "Standard combat course. If you can complete it in under 15 minutes, which, by the way, is the absolute minimum passing time, then we'll leave you alone." The crowd murmured with interest. Several cadets were already pulling out their phones to record what they clearly expected to be an entertaining failure. The obstacle course was notoriously difficult, designed to challenge even experienced military personnel. For someone who appeared to have no combat training, 15 minutes would be nearly impossible. "And if I don't make the time?" Sarah asked. Stevens' grin widened. "Then you pack your bags and leave immediately. No second chances, no appeals, no crying to the instructors. You admit you don't belong here and find yourself a different career path." Sarah appeared to consider the proposal carefully. In reality, she was calculating angles, distances, and optimal approaches for each obstacle. The course was challenging, but nothing compared to the specialized training facilities where she had honed her skills. The obstacles were standard military fare: wall climbs, rope traversals, tire runs, and crawling sections. "Seems fair," Sarah said finally. "But let's make it more interesting." Stevens looked surprised. "More interesting how?" "If I complete the course in under 10 minutes, Sarah said calmly, "then you and your friends here publicly apologize for your behavior and treat all future newcomers with basic respect." The blonde cadet's eyes narrowed. 10 minutes was an exceptional time that only the most elite cadets achieved. And then only after weeks of practice on the specific course layout. For a newcomer to even suggest such a time was either pure delusion or incredible arrogance. "You're serious?" Stevens asked. 10 minutes? Do you have any idea what you just proposed?" Sarah shrugged. "You wanted to test whether I belong here. That seems like a reasonable way to settle the question definitively." Stevens looked around at her followers, all of whom were nodding eagerly. This was even better than they had hoped. Not only would they humiliate the newcomer, but her outrageous confidence would make the failure even more spectacular. "Deal," Stevens said, extending her hand. "But when you fail, and you will fail, I want to hear you say the words. I want you to admit that you were wrong, that you don't belong here, and that you're sorry for wasting everyone's time." Sarah shook the offered hand with a firm grip. "Understood. Should we head over to the course?" The crowd began moving toward the obstacle course area like a parade. Word was spreading throughout the facility, and Sarah could see more cadets joining the group from every direction. Several instructors were now following as well, their expressions ranging from amusement to concern. As they walked, Sarah overheard fragments of conversation from the surrounding cadets. Most were making bets on how quickly she would quit, or which obstacle would stop her completely. A few expressed doubts about Stevens's approach, but they were quickly shouted down by the majority. "This is going to be embarrassing," muttered one cadet behind Sarah. "I almost feel bad for her." "Don't," replied another. "Stevens is doing her a favor. Better to learn the truth now than waste months in training she'll never complete." At the entrance to the obstacle course area, Stevens turned to address the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have ourselves a little demonstration. Our new friend here believes she can complete the combat course in under 10 minutes. For context, the current facility record is 8 minutes and 37 seconds, set by our top graduating cadet last year." The crowd responded with whistles and applause. Someone had set up a portable speaker system, turning the event into a full spectacle. Sarah noticed several people live streaming on their phones, which meant word of this challenge was likely spreading beyond the immediate facility. Stevens continued, "The rules are simple. Complete the entire course in the specified time using proper form. Any shortcuts, any skipped obstacles, any safety violations result in immediate disqualification." She pulled out a professional-grade stopwatch. "Everyone ready?" Sarah walked to the starting line and began some basic stretches. Her movements were economical and purposeful, giving no indication of her true capabilities. She had decided to hold back just enough to make her success believable while still meeting the 10-minute deadline. "Any last words?" Stevens called out mockingly. Sarah looked directly at her challenger. "Just one thing. After this is over, I hope you'll remember that assumptions can be dangerous in our line of work." Stevens laughed and raised the stopwatch. "On your mark, get set." The stopwatch clicked, and Sarah exploded into motion. Her first steps caught everyone by surprise. Instead of the hesitant, uncertain movement they expected, she moved with fluid precision and startling speed. The opening obstacle was a series of low barriers, requiring alternating jumps and crawls, designed to test agility and stamina simultaneously. Sarah flowed over and under each barrier without breaking rhythm, her movements economical and perfectly timed. The crowd's initial jeers and laughter began to fade as they watched her technique. Even Stevens's confident smirk started to waver as the seconds ticked by and Sarah maintained her blistering pace. The second section featured a rope climb to a 20-foot platform, followed by a horizontal rope traverse across a water pit. Most cadets struggled with the upper body strength required and took several minutes to complete this section. Sarah reached the rope and began climbing with a technique that immediately caught the attention of the watching instructors. Instead of the standard hand-over-hand method taught in basic training, she used her legs to grip and push, allowing her arms to pull in perfect coordination. She scaled the rope in seconds, reaching the platform before many spectators had even processed what they were witnessing. The traverse rope presented no challenge at all. She moved across it like she was walking on solid ground. "What the hell?" muttered one of Stevens' companions, checking his own watch against the official time. "She's already at the wall climb." The wall climb was typically the breaking point for most newcomers. A 12-foot vertical wooden barrier with minimal handholds. It required not just strength but technique and confidence. Many cadets fell repeatedly before finally making it over, if they managed it at all. Sarah approached the wall at full speed and leaped upward, her fingers finding holds that most people couldn't reach. She moved up the surface like gravity was merely a suggestion, flowing over the top and dropping down the other side in one continuous motion. The landing was perfect. bent knees absorbing the impact, immediately transitioning into a sprint toward the next obstacle. The crowd had gone completely silent, except for scattered expressions of disbelief. Stevens was staring at her stopwatch, shaking it as if it might be malfunctioning. According to the timer, Sarah was on pace for a time that would shatter the facility record. The tire run section consisted of 50 heavy tractor tires arranged in a zigzag pattern. The standard approach was to step carefully through each tire, maintaining balance while managing fatigue from the previous obstacles. Sarah attacked the section with a completely different strategy, using the tires as stepping stones and maintaining forward momentum by treating them like a complex dance floor. Her feet never lingered in any single tire for more than a fraction of a second. She bounded from tire to tire with perfect balance and timing. Her path through the maze so efficient it looked choreographed. The watching instructors were now moving closer, their casual interest replaced by intense focus. "She's not even breathing hard," observed one cadet in amazement. It was true. While most people would be gasping for air by this point, Sarah appeared completely composed. Her breathing was controlled and steady, her movements showing no signs of fatigue or strain. Whatever training she had received, it was clearly far beyond anything the other cadets had experienced. The crawl section came next, a 100-yard stretch under barbed wire barriers set just 18 inches off the ground. Most people army crawled through this section, accumulating dirt and scratches while fighting exhaustion. Sarah dropped into a low tactical crawl that kept her completely clear of the wire while maintaining remarkable speed. She moved like water flowing downhill, finding the optimal path and maintaining momentum even in the confined space. Her technique was flawless, clearly developed through extensive practice in similar conditions. The watching crowd could only stare as she emerged from the far end of the crawl section without a scratch or even much dirt on her clothes. Stevens was now openly staring at her stopwatch, her face pale. "This isn't possible," she whispered to one of her companions. "No one moves like that on their first attempt." The final section of the course was designed as the ultimate test, a combination obstacle requiring climbing, swinging, balancing, and jumping skills all in sequence. Most cadets who made it this far were exhausted and shaking, struggling to coordinate the complex movements required. Sarah approached the final section with the same fluid confidence she had shown throughout the course. She swung across a series of hanging rings without pause, transitioned to a narrow balance beam without losing momentum, and concluded with a precision jump to a small platform that many cadets missed entirely. As her feet touched the finish line platform, the silence from the crowd was deafening. Stevens looked down at her stopwatch, then looked again. Her face, a mask of shock and disbelief. "Time!" she called out in a voice barely above a whisper. "Well?" someone in the crowd shouted. "What's the time?" Stevens cleared her throat and tried to speak normally, but her voice cracked. 7 minutes and 43 seconds. The crowd erupted. Shouts of amazement, scattered applause, and numerous expressions of disbelief filled the air. Several cadets were frantically checking their own timing devices, unable to accept what they had just witnessed. The facility record hadn't just been broken, it had been shattered by nearly a full minute. Sarah stood on the finish platform, breathing normally and showing no signs of exertion. She looked out at the stunned crowd, then directly at Stevens. "I believe we had a wager," she said calmly. Stevens stood frozen, the stopwatch still in her hand, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Her companions were equally shocked. Their earlier confidence completely evaporated. The dynamic of the situation had shifted so dramatically that no one seemed quite sure what to say or do next. One of the facility instructors, a grizzled veteran with 30 years of military service, pushed through the crowd to approach Sarah. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes showed the sharp interest of someone who recognized exceptional skill when he saw it. "Miss," he said formally, "I think we need to have a conversation." The instructor's name tag read Rodriguez, and his bearing immediately commanded respect from the assembled crowd. As he approached Sarah, the other cadets instinctively stepped back, creating a clear space around the finish platform. Rodriguez had the look of someone who had seen real combat and earned his authority through experience rather than rank alone. "That was quite a performance," Rodriguez said, his tone carefully neutral. Mind telling me where you learned to move like that? Sarah stepped down from the platform, maintaining eye contact with the instructor. Various training programs over the years, sir. Nothing too exotic. Rodriguez's weathered face showed the faintest hint of a smile. Nothing too exotic. Right. He glanced at the stunned crowd. Then back at Sarah. Miss, in 30 years of military service, I've seen exactly 3 people complete that course in under 8 minutes. 2 of them were Navy SEALs, with over a decade of specialized training. The third was a Marine Force recon operator who had just returned from his 4th deployment. The crowd stirred at this information. Several cadets exchanged glances, beginning to understand that they were witnessing something far beyond their initial expectations. Stevens remained motionless, still clutching her stopwatch like a lifeline. Rodriguez continued. Your technique on the rope climb was textbook special operations. Your approach to the wall showed advanced tactical training, and your performance in the crawl section. He paused, studying Sarah's face carefully. That was SEER school technique. Survival, evasion, resistance, escape. Not something they teach in basic training. Sarah maintained her composed expression, but something flickered in her eyes that Rodriguez immediately noticed. The instructor took another step closer, lowering his voice so only Sarah could hear. Who are you? He asked directly. Before Sarah could respond, Stevens finally found her voice. This is impossible, she declared loudly, causing the crowd to turn their attention back to her. No one just shows up and breaks facility records. She must have cheated somehow, or... Stevens gestured helplessly at the obstacle course. Or there's something we don't know. Rodriguez turned toward Stevens with an expression that made several nearby cadets take involuntary steps backward. Cadet Stevens, are you suggesting that I cannot accurately time an obstacle course? Or perhaps that the course itself was somehow compromised? Stevens's face went pale. No, sir. You just meant that your assumptions about this young woman were incorrect. Rodriguez interrupted firmly. And rather than acknowledging that error and learning from it, you're looking for excuses to maintain your worldview. The instructor's words carried the weight of authority and experience. Stevens nodded reluctantly, clearly wanting to argue further, but recognizing the futility of challenging Rodriguez directly. Sarah watched this exchange with interest, noting how quickly the power dynamic had shifted. The instructor was clearly more perceptive than the cadets had expected, and his questions were becoming increasingly pointed. Her cover story was solid, but Rodriguez seemed to sense there was more to her background than she was revealing. Now, Rodriguez continued, addressing the entire crowd, I believe there was a wager made before this demonstration. Something about an apology? Stevens looked like she wanted the ground to swallow her whole. Her followers had moved away slightly, distancing themselves from her obvious discomfort. The crowd watched with the same anticipation they had shown before the race, but now the energy was completely different. Stevens? Rodriguez prompted when no response came. The blonde cadet straightened her shoulders and took a deep breath. She began, then stopped and looked around at the watching faces. I apologize, she said finally, her voice barely audible. Louder, Rodriguez commanded. And be specific about what you're apologizing for. Stevens' jaw clenched, but she complied. I apologize for making assumptions about your capabilities based on your appearance. I was wrong to try to intimidate you, and I was wrong to suggest you didn't belong here. Sarah nodded graciously. Apology accepted. And for what it's worth, this kind of hazing isn't uncommon in military training, but you might want to consider that underestimating people can be dangerous in real operational situations. The gentle rebuke, delivered without malice or gloating, somehow made Stevens's humiliation complete. Several cadets in the crowd were nodding agreement with Sarah's words. Clearly, having learned their own lesson from the demonstration, Rodriguez clapped his hands together, breaking the tension. All right, show's over. Everyone back to your regular training schedules. This facility runs on discipline, not entertainment. The crowd began to disperse reluctantly, with many cadets stealing glances back at Sarah as they walked away. Small groups formed immediately, animated conversations breaking out as people tried to process what they had witnessed. Stevens and her companions were among the last to leave, moving slowly and speaking in hushed tones. The blonde woman kept looking back at Sarah with an expression mixing embarrassment, curiosity, and grudging respect. When the area had mostly cleared, Rodriguez turned his full attention back to Sarah. "Now then, Miss Martinez," Sarah supplied. "Sarah Martinez. Miss Martinez. I think it's time we had that conversation in my office. There are some questions about your background that need answering." Sarah had expected this moment would come eventually. Her performance on the obstacle course had been calculated to prove her point without revealing the full extent of her capabilities. But even holding back significantly, she had clearly demonstrated skills that raised serious questions about her stated background. "Of course, sir. Should I collect my gear first?" Rodriguez shook his head. "That can wait. This conversation is more important." He gestured toward the main building. "After you." As they walked toward the administration building, Rodriguez continued speaking in a conversational tone that didn't quite mask his underlying intensity. "You know, in my experience, people with your level of training don't usually end up in standard cadet programs. They're either already deployed with specialized units, or they're transitioning into instructor roles, or," he paused meaningfully, "they're on assignment." Sarah kept her expression neutral, but inwardly she was impressed by the instructor's perceptiveness. Rodriguez was clearly more than just a training facility administrator. His questions and observations suggested someone with extensive experience in special operations and intelligence work. "Sometimes, people just want to expand their training," she said diplomatically. Rodriguez chuckled, a sound with little humor in it. "Miss Martinez, I've been around long enough to recognize when someone is operating undercover. The question is whether you're here for legitimate reasons or if I need to make some phone calls to verify your story." Rodriguez's office was spartanly decorated, but filled with telltale signs of an extensive military career. Commendations lined one wall. Photographs showed him with various special forces units in different global locations, and a collection of challenge coins from elite military organizations covered his desk. Sarah noted several items that confirmed her growing suspicion that Rodriguez was far more than a standard training instructor. "Please have a seat," Rodriguez said, settling behind his desk and opening a secure computer terminal. His fingers moved quickly across the keyboard, and Sarah caught glimpses of military database screens that were definitely above standard access levels. "Sarah Martinez," he said, reading from the screen. "According to your file, you completed basic training at Great Lakes, followed by advanced technical training in communication systems. Most recent assignment was a shore-based logistics coordination role in Norfolk." He looked up from the screen with raised eyebrows. Quite a jump from radio maintenance to braking facility obstacle course records. Sarah had prepared for this level of scrutiny, but Rodriguez's access to detailed military databases was more extensive than she had anticipated. Her cover identity was solid and would hold up under most investigations, but she sensed that Rodriguez had connections that went beyond normal channels. "I've always stayed in good physical shape," she said evenly. "Personal training, civilian gym work, some rock climbing as a hobby. I suppose it added up to more than I realized." Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, studying her face carefully. "Rock climbing. Interesting hobby for someone in radio maintenance." He turned his monitor slightly so Sarah could see the screen. "According to this, your fitness scores were consistently above average but nothing exceptional. Your performance today suggests training that goes far beyond weekend rock climbing." The instructor stood and moved to a filing cabinet, extracting a thick folder. "Miss Martinez, I'm going to share something with you that might change the nature of our conversation. This facility isn't just a standard advanced training center. We also serve as a screening location for specialized programs that require discretion." Sarah's pulse quickened slightly, but she maintained her calm expression. The conversation was heading in a direction that could either blow her cover completely or potentially align with her actual mission parameters. Rodriguez returned to his desk and opened the folder, revealing what appeared to be classified documentation. "We occasionally receive personnel who are operating under various levels of classification. Sometimes they're testing new training protocols, Sometimes they're evaluating our security procedures, and sometimes—" He paused, looking directly at Sarah. "Sometimes they're here for reasons I'm not cleared to know." The implication hung in the air between them. Rodriguez was essentially offering Sarah a way to acknowledge her true status without compromising operational security. It was a professional courtesy between experienced operators, recognition that some missions required maintaining cover even within military facilities. "I appreciate your discretion," Sarah said carefully. "But I'm not sure I understand what you're suggesting." Rodriguez smiled, and for the first time, it seemed genuine rather than tactical. "Miss Martinez, I've been in special operations for most of my career. Before I took this assignment, I spent 8 years with Naval Special Warfare Command. I know what advanced training looks like. And I know what it means when someone shows up with skills they shouldn't officially possess." He closed the folder and leaned forward. "So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to ask you one direct question, and based on your answer, we'll proceed accordingly. Are you here under official orders that require maintaining your cover identity?" Sarah considered her options quickly. Her mission parameters allowed for limited disclosure to appropriate personnel if operational security was compromised. Rodriguez clearly had the necessary clearance level and had essentially identified her as being undercover. Continuing to maintain her civilian identity at this point might actually be more suspicious than acknowledging her true status. "Yes," she said simply. Rodriguez nodded as if he had expected this answer. "Good. That makes things much simpler." He picked up his phone and dialed a number from memory. "Colonel Peterson? It's Rodriguez at the training center. I need to report a probable classification issue." "Yes, sir, I'll hold." While waiting, Rodriguez addressed Sarah again. "Colonel Peterson oversees liaison between this facility and various special programs. He'll need to verify your status and determine how to proceed without compromising whatever operation you're involved in." Sarah appreciated the professional manner in which Rodriguez was handling the situation. Rather than trying to interrogate her further or making assumptions about her mission, he was following proper protocols for dealing with classified personnel. "Colonel?" "Yes. I have a trainee here who just demonstrated capabilities significantly beyond her official background." "Martinez, Sarah." "Yes, I'll wait." There was a long pause as Rodriguez listened to instructions from the other end of the line. His expression remained neutral, but Sarah could see him taking notes on a secure pad. "Understood, sir." "Yes, she's here now." "No. No security issues. Just the usual cadet dynamics. I'll make the arrangements immediately." He hung up and turned back to Sarah. "Well, Miss Martinez, it seems your presence here has been anticipated. Colonel Peterson is aware of your actual status and has authorized me to provide appropriate support while maintaining your cover identity to the extent possible." Sarah felt a wave of relief. The mission parameters were still intact, and she could continue her assignment without the complications that would have arisen from a blown cover. "However," Rodriguez continued, "your performance today has created some challenges. Word of your obstacle course time is already spreading throughout the facility. People are going to be watching you much more closely now, and that level of attention might not be compatible with whatever your actual objectives are here." This was indeed a problem Sarah had not fully anticipated. Her decision to thoroughly demonstrate her capabilities to shut down Stephen's harassment had succeeded, but it had also raised her profile significantly beyond what was optimal for her mission. "I can probably manage the attention," she said. "People have short memories for these kinds of things." Rodriguez shook his head. "Not in a place like this. You just broke a facility record by nearly a minute on your first attempt. That's the kind of performance that becomes legend around here. Cadets will be trying to figure out your background for weeks." He was right, and Sarah knew it. Her cover would be under constant scrutiny now, and maintaining the fiction of being a communications technician would become increasingly difficult as people watched her every move. "What do you recommend?" she asked. Rodriguez smiled grimly. "That depends on what your actual mission parameters allow. Can you operate effectively if people suspect you're more than you appear? Or do you need to maintain complete cover?" It was a good question, and one that would require careful consideration of her actual objectives at the facility. Sarah weighed her options carefully. Her actual mission at the facility was to conduct a security assessment of the new training protocols and identify potential vulnerabilities in the program. The assignment required her to observe both the training methods and the cadet selection process from the inside, which meant maintaining some level of cover was still important. I can work with partial exposure, she decided. As long as people don't know my specific background or current unit, I should be able to complete my objectives. Rodriguez nodded approvingly. That's what I hoped you'd say. It gives us some flexibility in managing the situation. He made another note on his secure pad. Here's what I propose. We acknowledge that you have more military experience than your file indicates, but we keep the details vague. Former special operations training, cross-training with allied forces, something that explains your capabilities without revealing current classification levels. It was a reasonable compromise that would satisfy most people's curiosity while protecting operational security. Sarah could maintain her assessment mission while operating under a slightly modified cover identity. That should work, she agreed. What about Stevens and her group? They're going to be particularly interested in explanations after today. Rodriguez chuckled. Actually, I think today's lesson will be more valuable for them than any formal training module. Stevens is a good cadet with strong leadership potential. But she had developed some problematic assumptions about military capability and appearance. Your demonstration corrected those assumptions in a way that classroom instruction never could have achieved. This was true, and Sarah realized that her confrontation with Stevens had actually served a broader educational purpose. Military effectiveness came in many forms, and learning to recognize capability regardless of appearance was a crucial skill for future officers. In fact, Rodriguez continued, I'd like to suggest that you consider taking a more visible role during your time here. Not as an instructor exactly, but as a training partner who can challenge the other cadets in ways our standard program might not address. The proposal was intriguing and could actually enhance her assessment mission by giving her deeper insight into the training methodology and cadet development process. What did you have in mind? Informal mentoring, advanced training demonstrations, maybe some specialized workshops on topics where you have particular expertise. It would give you legitimate reasons to interact with all aspects of the program while providing real value to the other trainees. Sarah considered the implications. A more active role would indeed provide better access to her assessment targets, but it would also require more careful management of her cover identity and potentially expose her to additional scrutiny from higher authorities. A knock on Rodriguez's door interrupted her thoughts. Come in, he called. To Sarah's surprise, Stevens entered the office, her earlier confidence replaced by obvious nervousness. She glanced uncertainly between Rodriguez and Sarah before addressing the instructor. Sir, I wanted to apologize formally for the incident earlier. My behavior was unprofessional and reflected poorly on the program. Rodriguez gestured for Stevens to take the remaining chair. Cadet Stevens, thank you for coming forward. That shows good judgment and character. He looked between the two women. I think this situation actually presents a learning opportunity for everyone involved. Stevens nodded eagerly, clearly hoping to redeem herself after her earlier humiliation. Yes, sir. Whatever you think is appropriate. Miss Martinez has agreed to take on some additional responsibilities during her time here, Rodriguez explained. I'd like you to serve as her liaison with the other cadets and help coordinate some advanced training sessions. Sarah could see the wisdom in this arrangement. By giving Stevens a role in the solution, Rodriguez was transforming her from a potential ongoing problem into an ally. It also provided Sarah with a direct connection to the cadet leadership structure. Stevens looked surprised but pleased. I'd be honored, sir. And Miss Martinez, I want you to know that I learned something important today. I made assumptions based on appearance and nearly missed recognizing genuine capability. We all make assumptions, Sarah replied diplomatically. The key is learning from them when they're proven wrong. Rodriguez stood, indicating the meeting was concluding. Excellent. Stevens, I want you to work with Miss Martinez to organize some informal training sessions. Focus on areas where different perspectives and techniques might benefit the group. And Stevens? Yes, sir. Make sure the other cadets understand that military excellence comes in many forms. Today's demonstration should have made that clear, but sometimes, lessons need reinforcement. Stevens nodded firmly. Understood, sir. I'll make sure the message is received. As they prepared to leave Rodriguez's office, Sarah reflected on how dramatically the day had evolved. What had begun as a simple confrontation with overzealous cadets had transformed into an opportunity to enhance both her mission effectiveness and the training program itself. The walk back across the facility grounds was markedly different from Sarah's earlier arrival. Word of her performance had spread quickly, and she noticed cadets watching her with curiosity and respect rather than dismissive amusement. Several nodded respectfully as she passed, and a few even offered verbal greetings. Stevens walked beside her, clearly still processing the events of the day. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Of course. What kind of training did you really have? I've never seen anyone move like that, and I've trained with some exceptional people." Sarah chose her words carefully, sticking to the modified cover story she and Rodriguez had developed. Various programs over the years, cross-training opportunities with different military branches, and some international exchange programs. It adds up over time. Stevens nodded, accepting the explanation while clearly understanding that the details would remain private. "Well, whatever your background, I'm glad you're here. I think we can all learn something from working with you." As they approached the cadet quarters, Sarah noticed a group of trainees gathered around the obstacle course, several of them attempting to replicate elements of her technique. The sight brought a smile to her face. Nothing motivated military personnel quite like witnessing superior performance and wanting to understand how to achieve it themselves. Her mission at the facility was just beginning, but already the parameters had shifted in ways that might prove advantageous. Instead of observing the training program from the periphery, she now had an opportunity to engage with it directly and assess its strengths and weaknesses from a position of influence. The confrontation with Stevens had been an unexpected complication that had transformed into an opportunity. Sometimes the best outcomes emerged from situations that seemed problematic at first glance. As Sarah settled into her new quarters that evening, she reflected that tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities to fulfill her assessment mission while contributing to the development of the next generation of military leaders.